Shalom Aleichem and welcome everyone. As we are preparing for Shabbat, Parashat Noach, Tafshin Pei Aleph, as we're living and continuing to go through these turbulent times. In Parshat Noach, the Parsha starts off, Eile Toledot Noach ish tzaddik. These are the offspring of Noach. Noach was a righteous man. You don't find often in the Torah that the Torah says Abraham was a tzaddik, Yitzchak was a tzaddik, Yaakov was a tzaddik. Doesn't say by Moshe Rabbeinu, Aaron HaKohen that they were tzaddikim. Yet by Noach, it tells us Noach ish tzaddik. It gives him a title. Now he is a tzaddik. There was a religious Jew who lived in Bnei Brak, and he became known as an Admor, as a Hasidic Rebbe. He does not have a multitude of Hasidim, but he has a shul. And because he had the shul, he became to be a Rebbe. And the shul is busy, and people come, they pray, they learn there. Now, you don't just become a Rebbe. Most Hasidic leadership is transferred from father to son-in-law. It goes in the family. And no one can just one day get up and just make himself a Rebbe. There's something to it. And this man, the people made him a Rebbe. He felt a little uncomfortable that his people who came to pray in his shul started calling him Rebbe and having him act like a Rebbe. So he went to the great Chazon Ish and he asked the saintly Chazon Ish, was it okay that he be called a Rebbe? He says, I have a base medrash, I have a shul, people come, they learn, they daven there, but is it okay for me to call myself a Rebbe? I don't feel comfortable with it. Maybe I'm a thief for taking that title. It's misrepresentation. And the Chazon Ish said, today, in contemporary times, the mere fact that a Jew has the ability to support and to sustain another Jew, and he does it, it's sufficient reason for him to label himself as a Rebbe. And even if the purpose was a personal, and you did it on purpose, for your own title and own kavod, but since when you assumed this title, it resulted in you growing in your Torah, then you may and should do it. For at times, Rabotai, the title makes a considerable difference to a person. At times, when a person has a title, has a responsibility, it can lead him to a different level that he wouldn't be able to get to if he didn't have that title or that responsibility. The Gemara in Bava Metzia on Daf 85a tells us a very, very interesting story that happened. Rabbi Yehuda Anossi, the great Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda Anossi, arrived in the city where Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, used to live. And when he got there, he asked the local people, does that righteous person, Rabbi Elazar, have a son? And they said to him, he has a son who is off the derech. He's wayward. He went off the way. He went off the righteous path. Not only that, he gives himself for hire. And the zonaz who charge 2 coins so people can be with them, then pay Rabbi Elazar's son 8 coins to be with him. Rabbi Yehuda Hanosi, Rebbe had to figure out a way to get Rabbi Elazar's son out of there. He found Rabbi Elazar's son, took him, and gave him smicha on the spot, and told him, "You are now a rabbi." And took him to Rabbi Shimon ben Isi ben Lokania, the brother of the boy's mother, so he can teach him Torah. And so his uncle started to teach him Torah. And every day this boy would say, "I want to go back home. I want to go back to my town. This is too hard for me to learn Torah." And his uncle, Rabbi Shimon ben Isi ben Lokanya, would tell him, "You have been made wise, and you have been given a golden cloak, and you are called a rabbi, and yet you say you want to go back home." The boy said, "I vow that this thought of leaving is now abandoned. I will stay and improve my ways." The boy matured and became a true Talmid Chacham. And he came and he sat in the yeshiva of Yehuda Hanosi. Yehuda Hanosi heard his voice and said, "This voice is similar to the voice of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon." And those who were present said to him, "Yes, indeed, because it is his son." You see, Abotai, placing a person in a position of responsibility, giving him a title, can make all the difference. Noach ish tzaddik. Noach, know you're a tzaddik. In being a tzaddik, you have the ability. You have the ability to withstand the Mabul. As all of the world is being destroyed, you, Noach, can survive and live and continue the world the correct way. It's important that we call our children tzaddikim. Pesach Kron is famous for sharing a story. Whenever his children would do something the wrong way, he would say, "Oh, you're such a tzaddik," and keep himself back from saying something else. And his children would take that to heart. And as they grew up, they believed there could be tzaddikim. It's important that we give the appropriate titles to our children, to those people around us. Our titles, the names that we give them, can make or break them. As the Parsha continues, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem tells Noach to enter the Teva. And the Pasuk then says, "Vayavo Noach uvanav ve'ishto u'nshei vanav ito el hateva mipnei mei hamabul." Noach and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives went with him into the Teva, into the ark, because of the flood waters. Rashi quotes a midrash, and Rashi says, to a small degree, Noach lacked faith, as he only entered the Teva because of the waters of the flood. Not because Hashem told him, because of the waters of the flood. The implication is that Noach did not enter the ark until he was forced to by the rain. How can you say Noach lacked faith? Noach had to believe. He spoke to Hashem. He was building the ark for 120 years. He gathered all the animals. He was the only one in his generation to worry about the impending doom. Surely he must have believed. How can we say he didn't? How could the pasuk imply that he didn't? And what is wrong with waiting until he had no choice to enter? How can that be considered lacking in faith? So Mordechai Kamenetsky, Shlita, shares a very interesting story. In a small town, there was a severe drought. No rain. And the community synagogues were praying. Each shul separately praying for rain, but to no avail. The tears and prayers failed to unlock the sealed heavens. And for months, no rain came. Finally, the town's oldest sage held a meeting with the prominent community rabbis and lay leaders. And this elder sage said, there are two things missing from our prayer: faith and unity. Each one of us must impress upon his congregation the need to believe. If we are united and sincere, our prayers will be answered. He said that all the shuls in the city should join together for a day of tefillah, a day of tefillah, a day of prayer. Everyone, men, women, and children, would join together for this event. And he said, if both criteria are met, people came together and people believed, no one will leave that prayer service without getting drenched. Since there was no shul large enough to house all the community members, the date was set to gather and daven in a field. In the next few weeks, the rabbis spoke about bitachon, the importance of achdut, of unity and belief in Hashem. And on the designated day, the entire town gathered in a large field whose crops had long withered from the severe drought. Men, women, and children all gathered and anxiously awaited as the elder sage walked up to the podium to begin the service. But instead, this old sage looked around the crowd and then, in dismay, said to the people, "This will never work. Rain will not come." And he started walking away from the podium. The other rabbis sitting there on the dais were shocked. But Rabbi, everyone's here. We're all united. Surely they believe the rain will fall. Otherwise, no one would have bothered to come on a working day to come pray. The rabbi shook his head slowly and sadly and said, "No, they don't believe." He said, "They don't believe. I looked at the entire crowd, and not even one person brought an umbrella or a raincoat. If you believed it would rain, you would come with those." The level of faith that the Torah demanded from Noach would have had him bolt into the ark on the very morning the flood was meant to come. He did not know how hard it would get. He did not know how severe the storm would get. It started off as a light rainstorm, and his waiting until be forced in by the sheer ferocity of the storm showed that Noach didn't completely believe. His faith should have kicked him in to go straight in, but he waited to see if it would really come. And for that, he's considered to be lacking of faith. How often do we cancel plans or change a course of action on the day because of the say-so of the weatherman? But to take the predictions of the Torah, that if a person lies, steals, or cheats, his business won't prosper correctly, we don't believe completely. The Torah says to give tzedakah, and we don't do it. Keep it over aim and the promises that come with it. And how Torah is the most important, and we don't take it as most important. Are we any? Where's our level of faith? Do we believe, or do we leave the umbrella at home? For our third and final offering on this week's parasha. We come after the Mabul, as Noach is leaving the Teva, as the pasuk says, "Vayetze Noach uvanav ve'ishto u'nshei vanav ito." And Noach went out. The Zohar HaKadosh tells us that when Noach exited the Teva and he saw firsthand and up close the terrible destruction from which he was spared from, he began to weep bitterly. Ribono shel olam, he said, "You are called Rachum, compassionate. You should have shown mercy towards your creations." Hashem said back, "Foolish shepherd, now you plead on their behalf? Where were you earlier when I informed you that I was going to send a flood to destroy your generation? The tears that you shed now are too late. There is a time and place for prayer." How many of us have been guilty of noticing someone's pain too late in the game, when our assistance is neither effective nor desired? Noach was clearly a sensitive person, but he required a trigger to jumpstart his empathy and sensitivity. The trigger was the Teva. Sadly, it was too late for the victims of the flood. Too late. Too little. Waiting and not appreciating and not taking the opportunity, squandering time, frivolous away life. There's a story told about the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, Harav Betzalel Zolti, who was a Torah giant without comparison. When young Betzalel Zolti was a lad of 10 years old, he was living in Yerushalayim, and an epidemic of serious eye disease overran Jerusalem. And most people who caught it lost their eyesight. Medicine was very rare and hard to get. Betzalel was a brilliant student whose thirst for Torah was unquenchable. Every minute he had, he studied. He was an orphan from his father. His mother took care of him, and his mother would daven and pray that her son would become great in Torah leadership. And one day, young Betzalel came home from Cheder, complaining that his eyes hurt. She turned to heaven and she prayed, "Hashem, please help him, that he can learn Torah." He went to school, he came back. His eyes were swollen and painful, and his vision began to blur. A trip to the doctor confirmed the worst nightmares. He had it, and he was going blind. In her deep pain, Betzalel's mother did what any responsible Jewish mother would do. Prepared to take her son to the kever of Rachel Imenu and pour out her heart. She packed up Betzalel, and together they walked. And he couldn't see, and it was very hard, and they were stumbling around. And finally they reached the kever of Rachel Imenu. Betzalel cried out, "Hashem, I ask you one request. And I want Rachel Imenu to hear as well. I'm prepared to give up my vision and never see my loving mother again, my friends, the food I eat. I'm ready to never see the world again. But one thing I'm not prepared to give up is seeing the Holy Torah. I cannot live without learning Torah. I didn't learn enough. I want to know it all." And with such prayers, he cried, and he split the heavens. His tears flowed freely, and exhausted from the journey, Betzalel fell asleep. His mother picked him up, placed him in the carriage, and pushed him home. The next morning, Betzalel woke and told his mother, I want to go to Cheder. Mom, what are you going to do in Cheder? You can't see. He said, Mommy, I can see now, and I want to go to learn Torah. Mom said, you sure you can see? Hashem answered us. It's a nes. His mother said, you know what? Let's go to the doctor and let's check. Betzalel said, I must return immediately so that I may continue learning Torah. I now can see. I received a gift from Hashem. I can see again. But I don't know how long this gift will last. I must use every spare minute right now to learn. And Betzalel returned to school, refusing to go to the doctor. The story is incredible. And what impressed me the most was Rav Zolti's attitude to regaining his sight. It was a gift. How can you squander such a gift? Imagine if we lived this way. Every moment of life, every ability to speak, think, a gift. It's something we must appreciate, we must value. But we're a little too late, and a little too little. Are we prepared to stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu and explain why we are guilty of doing too little, too late? Noach cried for the victims of the flood, too little, too late. What about ourselves? Are we going to cry in the last day we didn't do what we wanted to do? Now is the time. Don't be too little. Don't be too late. As the Hafetz Chaim was once asked by the Rav and Lida to help in building a community mikvah. Chafetz Chaim spoke about it. People agreed to come. People gave money. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough. And so the Chafetz Chaim decided he was going to go back to Lida. And he was going to complete the mission that he went to do originally. His family argued, telling him, you can't go. It's too long of a trip. It's a Friday. You'll come home late. It's snowy outside. It's dangerous. You shouldn't go. They tried to convince him to change his mind. But the Chafetz Chaim was adamant. He had begun something, he would complete it. And he said, when I come to the world of truth, they'll ask me, why didn't you go to Lida? What should I tell them? It was cold. I'm too weak, I'm too old. The roads were snow covered. It was frigid outside. They won't accept such excuses. The Chafetz Chaim went to Lida and was successful in reaching the people. He raised the necessary fund to build a mikvah. And he made it home in time for Shabbat. He could have waited until after Shabbat, but that might have been too late. And so, Rabbatai, it's important for us as well not to be late, not to be little, to right away do what we need to get done, and to appreciate the gifts that we have right now, and not once it goes away. It's important to have full bitachon, and to really believe that what we're praying for, and what we need, and for all the craziness that's going on in our communities now, that everything should be opened up, and the children should go to Cheder and learn where they're supposed to, in a safe and correct way. We have to pray for that and believe that. And remember to give appropriate titles and responsibilities to people in an effort to build them up and make them better people. And with these lessons, Rabotai, I would love to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom.